The guys that appear in this
video
are delinquents. Please, do not under any circumstances imitate anything they do. Don't do it, man. I'm serious. No, bad idea.
No, you goddamn little bitch-ass piece of shit! Do not! God damn it.
We can protect you, but for a cost. We'll pay anything. Very well.
I think, like with a lot of things Klebold and Harris did, the real infamy of Hitmen for Hire lies in its connection to what they did afterwards, not in the film itself. If it was posted to YouTube like 10 years later by someone else, I don't think anyone would even raise an eyebrow. Suicide photos. Next to the CCTV photo of Eric and Dylan going downstairs into the cafeteria, the most infamous images from the massacre are the pictures of the two dead in the library. But these photos, taken as crime scene evidence by police, weren't leaked until 3 years after the massacre, when someone sent them in to the National Enquirer. The National Enquirer, like any trash tabloid, made the suicide photos the centerfold and highlight of this 2002 issue. The photos are pretty fucked up. I've seen them a lot of times, but they're still kind of disturbing to look at, or more sad really, because it's like looking at self-destruction in human form. It's unknown who leaked the photos to the National Enquirer. Some suspect it could have been the parents of one of the victims. After all, very few other people would have had access to that kind of information. Interestingly, the National Enquirer is one of the original sources of the Eric killed Dylan theory, which we'll get into later, using the never-before-seen photos as their primary evidence. Hey Dylan. This refers to a very surreal exchange between Dylan Klebold and fellow student John Savage during the massacre. In the afternoon of 4/20/1999, John couldn't decide where he should go study for a class he was failing. He eventually settled on the library, a decision that could have been a huge mistake. When the library rampage started, he was right in the thick of it. I heard lots of gunfire, explosions, screams. It was just unreal, he said. I kept telling myself it had to be a dream, that this couldn't be happening.
Well, the first thing that I really remember was when a lady came running into the library and she said, "Everybody get under the tables, there's a kid out there with a gun." You know, that was my first like, oh man, something's going down.
Savage was hiding under the library table when Eric pointed his shotgun at him. When they came to my table, Eric stuck his head under the table and pointed his gun at me, so I scooted out of the way of the barrel, and then he pointed it at me again, and I scooted back out of the way. Then he stood up and said,
"Who's under there? Identify yourself."
I said, "It's John," because, you know, I kind of knew him a little, and I was hoping he'd like remember that I wasn't a jock, and that I'd, you know, tried to treat him with respect and stuff.
John Savage?
Dylan knew John Savage. They'd had a class together in theater. In fact, you can see them interact in this video.
That's it. You're sitting here the entire commission.
I said, "It's me, John," and Dylan said, "John Savage?" And I said, "Yes." And Dylan walked over to my side of the table and said, "Hi." And I said, "Hey Dylan, what are you doing?" And he shrugged and said, "Oh, killing people."
It was just creepy. And then so I looked up at him and I said, "Are you gonna kill me?" And he said, "What?" Again, because the fire alarms and everything. So I asked louder, "Are you gonna kill me?"
And he looked at me for a second, John Savage writes, and then he said, "No dude, just run, just get out of here." I remember thinking that if he'd said yes, I would have said, "Then make it quick, just put a bullet in my head and get it over with." But he let me go, so I ran outside. OKC bombing plan. In 1995, 26-year-old Timothy McVeigh came to a realization. He was sick of the government. He was sick of taxes, sick of deadly government sieges, sick of foreign policies, and, as a military veteran, he was sick of the US military attacking foreign countries. With Terry Nichols, a man Timothy had met in the military and who was over 10 years his senior, Timothy McVeigh gathered up 5,000 rounds of ammonium nitrate and nitromethane and planted a bomb in a rented Ryder truck, which he drove to the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. It detonated at 9:02 a.m. and destroyed the top half of the building, killing 168 people, including 19 children in a daycare center on the second floor. 684 others were wounded.
Black smoke billowing from the federal court building downtown, and there's debris, glass, Building matter spread on several downtown blocks. It looks as though emergency crews are on the scene trying to block off some downtown streets. Some workers are out of their building, and we can see glass blown out of other downtown office buildings about 5 blocks away. The explosion went off around 9 a.m., and we could feel the explosion in the newsroom of Channel 9. It shook the building, so you can imagine what it did downtown.
You could not see any survivors at the time, okay? It's really like nothing I've ever seen or been prepared for, and you know, I would have never ever expected anything of this magnitude.
We had 2 physicians with us, 2 PAs, and 6 RNs, and we went in and have been up there for several hours. There is no one that was available for us to triage because they're not taking them out at this point. They can't find anybody that's alive. Like Nikki said, one person did come out that was alive, but everyone else is dead, and we're talking women, men, and children. And this is pretty pathetic that someone would blow up some innocent children.
We still have a lot of people unaccounted for, and I know that a lot of employers were asking that any individuals who might have been in the building who had not checked in yet with someone, please do so. Call the Red Cross, let them know where you are and that you are fine, because they are trying to get those final counts in to let us know. They do want to count for each and every person who was in that building.
I think the most telling way really for us to try and tell this story, because I know most of us here have exhausted any adjectives that we might have had to describe what's happened today.
Known as the Oklahoma City bombing, after where it took place, it was the deadliest act of domestic terrorism at the time. McVeigh was caught not long after while driving on Interstate 35 in Noble County, Oklahoma. He was found guilty in 1997 and was executed 4 years later in 2001, ironically the year of an even deadlier terrorist attack that would happen a few months after his execution. When asked about the victims, McVeigh pretty much said, "Tough titties." To these people in Oklahoma who have lost a loved one, "I'm sorry, but it happens every day," he said. "You're not the first mother to lose a kid, or the first grandparent to lose a grandson or a granddaughter. It happens every day, somewhere in the world. I'm not going to go into that courtroom, curl into a fetal ball, and cry just because the victims want me to do that." However, he did say he regretted the children who died, and that he wouldn't have chosen that particular building if he knew there was a daycare, though Nichols disputes this. McVeigh may have been a grown man with an adult settle to score, but in some ways you can see his resemblance to 12th graders Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. Like Klebold, McVeigh was a computer whiz, and like Harris, he had aspirations to join the military, though unlike Harris, McVeigh was accepted and was a highly decorated soldier. But perhaps most importantly, while Harris and Klebold were irked by the jocks and bullies at their school, McVeigh believed the American government was the ultimate bully. The Oklahoma City bombing was his retaliation, and he even wanted to use the necessity defense at his trial, in essence claiming that he was in imminent danger from the government and he had to blow up the building for his own safety. His lawyers didn't quite see it that way. How far Dylan and Eric vested into McVeigh's political beliefs is a good question. Not that much, it doesn't seem like. They were teenagers after all, at an age where political beliefs are tossed around like a hot potato. That said, Eric Harris was definitely a fan. He was impressed by McVeigh's kill count and devastation level, and he wanted to surpass it. Klebold did as well. On the basement tapes, Klebold says their massacre will have, quote, the most deaths in U.S. history. Harris kisses his shotgun and replies, "Hopefully." Investigators suspect the original plan was for the Columbine High School massacre to take place on April 19, 1999, the same day as, and likely as an homage to, the Oklahoma City bombing. But since the boys couldn't gather all the ammunition in time, the date was moved to the next day, April 20th, coincidentally, Hitler's birthday. The 11K. The 11K is a loose term for all of Jefferson County's investigative reports into the Columbine shootings. There's actually closer to around 27,000 pages, along with CCTV footage, 911 calls, photographs, and diagrams. Most concrete information on Columbine comes from the 11K. It has basically everything: school records, interviews with students and staff, copies of Eric Harris's web pages, and more. It was released in portions between 2000 and 2006. Everything that's not within these documents was destroyed in 2011, or so the official Jeffco website claims. Brooks Brown. Brooks Brown is one of the more famous survivors of the massacre, mainly because of the encounter he had with Eric Harris. Eric had run into Brooks in the school's parking lot while he was on his way to commit the massacre. Brooks chewed him out for missing an important test, but Eric just laughed. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said. "Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home." Brooks thought Eric was being weird, but he went ahead and left because he wanted to smoke a cigarette off grounds. Not long after he lit up in the school's smoking pit, he heard the first gunshots, and that's when he got scared, and for good reason. Why did Eric say, "Brooks, I like you now"? Eric had weird word choice sometimes. But more seriously, he and Brooks had a falling out, starting when Brooks kept being late to give Eric a ride to school. Brooks says in his 2002 book, No Easy Answers, "Since I didn't care that much about school, I'd oversleep or dawdle around in the mornings, which meant that I was almost always running 10 minutes behind. Trevor, a friend of Brooks, never got too annoyed about it, but it drove Eric crazy. Every morning for the entire drive to Columbine, all I'd hear was Eric complaining about how I needed to get my shit together." One morning, I overslept again. Trevor called me, wondering where I was. "Sorry, man," I said. "I'll be right over." As I got dressed, the phone rang again. This time it was Eric. I knew what he was going to say before I even picked up. I didn't need this, I thought. After all, I wasn't asking Eric to pitch in gas money. I was late all the time, and by now Eric knew it. He still chose to ask for rides from me anyway, right? So he knew what he was getting. I told him I was running late. I suggested that he find another ride. Unfortunately for Eric, the bus had already left. He was pretty pissed off about it, and he started yelling at me over the phone about what a dick I was. I let him yell for a little while, then hung up. A few minutes later, I was at Trevor's house. "Eric's being a little bitch," I said as Trevor got into the car. "We're not picking him up today. We're just going straight to school." We headed out of our neighborhood towards Pierce Street. A familiar truck pulled out right in front of us. Eric had enlisted his dad to give him a ride. When Mr. Harris saw our car, he pulled over and we followed suit. Eric got out of his dad's truck and climbed into my back seat. "You asshole," he said. "I'm 10 fucking minutes late already. My dad's pissed off at me. I can't rely on you for anything." I'd had enough. I turned around in my seat and stared hard at him. "Dude, that's it. I don't need this shit every morning. I'm not giving you rides to school anymore." We arrived at school and went our separate ways. The next time Eric saw me at school, he refused to acknowledge me. I'd pass him in the hallways and say, "Hey Eric," and he'd just glare. Once I realized that he was going to make an issue of what had happened, I became so annoyed that I stopped talking to him too. End quote. Their falling out got even more intense when Eric threw snowballs at Trevor and Brooks' cars, denting Trevor's truck and making a small crack in Brooks' windshield. I was livid, Brooks wrote. I slammed on the brakes and leaned out of the car, yelling, "Fuck you. Fuck you, Eric. You're going to pay to fix this." Eric laughed at me. "Kiss my ass, Brooks. I ain't paying for shit." Brooks was so pissed off he decided to rat Eric out to Mrs. Harris, telling her that Eric had been going out at night vandalizing houses and that he had liquor and spray paint hidden in his room. Mrs. Harris wanted Brooks to come in and talk it over with Eric, but Brooks refused and just left. Trevor, meanwhile, stole Eric's backpack as revenge. When Judy Brown, Brooks' mom, caught wind of what had transpired, she decided Brooks, Trevor, and Eric were all going back to the Harris' house for a big confrontation. So she drove to the bus stop where Eric still was and said, "Eric, I've got your backpack and I'm taking it over to your mom's. Meet us there." Eric went ballistic when he saw they had his property, screaming and pounding on the car door. "Give me my backpack!" Mrs. Brown started backing the car away slowly, trying to reassure Eric that he'd be getting his stuff back if he met them at his mom's house, but Eric wasn't listening. He kept screaming and banging at the door. Everyone was scared of Eric. Trevor was shrinking away from him. When Mrs. Brown arrived at the Harris residence and told Mrs. Harris what Eric had done, Mrs. Harris started to cry. The next day, Brooks heard from friends that Eric was still threatening him, and Mrs. Brown called the police again. She told the officer about the windshield incident and said, "Eric thinks he got away with it. Please just go over there and let him know that he didn't." Later that day, the Browns got a phone call from Mr. Harris saying that Eric was going to make an apology and was coming to their house. Judy Brown hid Brooks and Aaron in the back bedroom while she went to face the beast.
A mother of 2 students at Columbine High, she sensed trouble more than a year ago.
I was very worried because I had confronted Eric. I knew what he was like.
Judy Brown's son, Brooks, was a classmate of Eric Harris. He'd known Dylan Klebold since Cub Scouts. 13 months before the shootings, the Brown family told police that Eric Harris had broken the windshield on their son's car and threatened to kill him.
The deputies went to Eric Harris's house and thinking maybe if they just talked to him, maybe Eric Harris would straighten up and that would be enough. But it got worse because Eric then knew that we had reported him, and so the threats got worse. We had several run-ins with Eric Harris, and in fact, I went to the mother once while that started to hate with me because they made him come back and apologize to me, and when he did, I confronted him and I let him do his spiel. And I said, Eric, you're not going to pull the wool over my eyes like you did over your parents. And he said, are you calling me a liar? And I said, I guess I am. Don't ever come out the street again. I'm going to call the police. Don't talk to my kid. Don't get near my kid.
Now, Brooks was much closer friends with Dylan Klebold. The two of them knew each other since early childhood and even went to a program for gifted children together. So you can imagine how awkward this falling out between Brooks and Eric was for Dylan. Brooks said, Dylan tried to make peace between us, but he always failed. Eric wanted nothing to do with me, and after what had happened to my windshield, I felt the same way towards him. Dylan and I would still go out to have cigarettes together, and Eric would refuse to go along because I was there. Sometimes I would go visit Dylan while he was working at 𝕮𝖑𝖏𝖏 Pizza, and then Eric would show up and I would have to leave. I wished I could do something to improve the situation, but if that meant talking to Eric again, I refused. I was too angry. In March of 1998, Klebold gave Brown the address to a website Harris had made. It's Eric's website, he said according to Brooks. You need to see it, and you can't tell Eric I gave it to you. On one page of the website, Harris had written a threat to bomb the neighborhood, specifically calling out Brooks Brown. Brooks thought Eric was taking things a step too far and told his parents, Randy and Judy Brown. The Browns immediately took copies of the website to the police.
Randy and Judy Brown say a year before the high school shootings, they were so concerned about Eric Harris's violent writings on the internet that they went to police. The Browns had had trouble with Eric Harris. They say Harris had threatened their son, Brooks, and vandalized his car. When Brooks found threats of mass murder on Harris's webpage, he brought it to his parents.
The entire website was dedicated to how he was going to kill the entire state of Colorado.
When the Browns met with investigators from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, they say they turned over several pages from Eric Harris's website.
But while the police claimed they were going to look into it and maybe even get Harris charged over the bomb threats on his website, nothing was actually done. In fact, after the massacre, police tried to deny the fact that complaints by the Brown family had even been filed, a bit difficult given the threats had reached the local newspapers way back when, in '98. Mr. and Mrs. Brown were pretty much finished with Eric after his threatening and fairly insane behavior, but Brooks himself decided to make up with Harris in their senior year of high school. I said we'd been pissed off at each other for long enough, he wrote. I told him that I had changed a lot since last year, that I knew I had been a piece of shit in a lot of ways, and that I hoped he felt the same way about himself. We were both immature, I said. I just want to move on. Eric seemed surprised. I don't think he ever expected I would extend an olive branch, much less admit that I had been a jerk. He shrugged and said, cool. It was strange. By the time class started, we were joking about what stupid little kids we had both been. Eric said there were probably 2 sophomores out there doing the same sort of thing right now, and that they wouldn't be talking again until senior year either. It was funny. We laughed. Dylan was stunned at the turn of events. He and I went out for a cigarette that day, and Eric was with us. We told Dylan that things were cool between us. To be honest, I think Dylan was one reason why Eric and I patched things up so easily. Both of us knew the strain our rift had put on him. Nobody likes to play the go-between. Several people have suggested to me that Eric found excuses to hate me back in junior year because he felt I was threatening his friendship with Dylan. After all, he had pushed away their other friends one by one. The theory makes sense. When you're younger and you live in a society like Columbine, you get the feeling that friendship is finite and can be tossed away easily, that starting a friendship with one person means losing friendships with others. Yet you learn through experience that friendship can be infinite. Eric came from a background of constantly moving around with his family. Who knows how many friendships were cut off for him each time. In Dylan, he saw a best friend, and he feared anything that could take that away. From there, he found excuses to make me a target. I was hoping all of that would be behind us now. End quote. You could say Eric Harris ultimately did put the past behind them, in one of the eeriest ways. Brooks Brown, like several Columbine survivors, has pretty much been trying to put together the pieces behind the massacre ever since. Tried to come to terms with the fact that people he considered his friends could do something so fucked up. He's strongly against the idea that violent video games were the root cause of 𝕮𝖏 choices, and instead believes bullying and the toxic atmosphere of the school were more to blame. Eric and Dylan created this tragedy, he told FHM in 2004, but Columbine created them. He used to run his own blog, where he shared his opinions on things and provided updates on games he was making and games he reviewed. Still, there's one thing that needs to be said about Brooks Brown. As you might have already been able to tell by the excerpts from his book, he's a storyteller. And you know what storytellers do? They embellish to make their stories more interesting. According to statements by his classmates, it was just common knowledge that Brooks Brown wasn't in the healthiest marriage with the truth. John Savage, who said he was pretty good friends with Brooks Brown, mentioned he'd seen Brooks show up on the news and pointed out it was well known that Brooks embellished his stories. Patrick Kelly, another student, said that Brooks Brown, quote, considered himself to be a master philosopher and tended to lie a lot. Student Renee Kinsella informed police that if someone did know about Eric and Dylan's massacre plans beforehand, it wouldn't be Brooks, since he was, quote, a male gossiper. She also said she wasn't surprised that Brooks was appearing on television so much in the wake of the massacre. He's an actor, she said. Senior Lane Newton said she knew Brooks Brown, that he was, quote, a good talker, and that she wouldn't trust him at all. Interestingly, it would seem that Brooks may have been stretching the truth some in this very story here. If we're going by Brooks's timeline, he and Eric had their falling out in winter of their junior year, which would be 1998. He also claimed that Eric was catching rides from other people, including Brooks, because he didn't have his driver's license. However, that would be wrong. Eric's driver's license was issued May 8th, 1997. Even Dylan, who was a year younger than most of his peers and typically fell slightly behind them with things like that, had his driver's license by 1998. Now, of course, Eric's license could have been suspended or something like that, but to say he didn't have one at all is false. Brooks himself seems to realize this. If you listen closely, you'll notice that he and Eric mysteriously go from juniors to sophomores and then juniors again. Looking at the police reports filed, it's clear that the snowball incident actually happened in February of 1997, not 1998, which would indeed make Eric and Brooks sophomores at the time. It would also mean they hadn't been speaking to each other for nearly 2 years instead of just one. To be fair though, police also thought the snowball incident happened in 1998 until they did an investigation of their files. Brooks was likely just misremembering the timeline of events. When he talks about reconciling with Eric, he does mention it had been over a year since he last hung out with him. Some also doubt the story where Klebold informed Brown about Eric's website, since there's evidence the Brown family already knew about it in 1997, but the timeline actually does seem to corroborate Brooks' story here. Aaron Brown, Brooks' younger brother, had seen Eric's website before in 1997, and he'd gone to the police anonymously as a concerned citizen in August of that year, but the threats Aaron reported were different from the ones Dylan allegedly showed Brooks in 1998. Aaron had reported Eric's infamous "you know what I hate" rants. In one of them, Eric says, "You know what I really hate? Liars. Oh God, I hate liars. And living in this fucking neighborhood, there's thousands of them. Why the fuck must people lie so damn much, especially about stupid things? Like, yeah, I just bought 5 cases of M80s in Oklahoma for about $5, and they are legal there and everything. Yeah, my parents buy most of my guns. Every once in a while I'll use my $4,000 paycheck and buy a shotgun or two. And my brand new Hummer just broke down on the highway when I was going 250 miles per hour. Stupid cars." Like that. Now what fucking part, if any, would a normal human being believe? And that's just one person. Another big example is Brooks Brown, phone number removed. Now according to him, he has a 215 IQ, 5 other homes, 2 in Alaska, and 3 in Florida, 95 mile per hour fastball, he is only 16, runs a mile in about 5 minutes, has an uncle that's the former head of all the armed forces and has access to the button. His other uncle is a multi-millionaire that lives in downtown Detroit, and his neighbors are the chick that sang Respect and the lead singer of Aerosmith. And that same uncle owns 30% of the stock of that Tylenol company, and his grandparents give him about $1,000 for each month, and his other grandpa can blow up every house in America because all the houses have C4 in the foundations, again, according to Brooks Brown. Okay, when people lie like that, it's not impressive, no one believes it, it sounds just plain stupid, and it's a fucking waste of my time. He mentions Brooks Brown again while detailing one of his, Klebold's, and their friend Zach Heckler's rebel missions, where they vandalized houses in the middle of the night. This mission was also liquor-free as a result of this person named Brooks Brown, phone number, who tried to narc on us, telling my parents that I had booze and shit in my room. I had to ditch every bottle I had and lie like a fucking salesman to my parents. All because Brooks Brown thought I put a little nick in his windshield from a snowball. BS, yes. Anyway, that was mission 4. These were the worst of the threats filed in 1997, but on March 18th, 1998, new more detailed threats are filed with police from Eric's also infamous pissed rant.
Over several pages from Eric Harris's website, pages that read, "I will rig up explosives all over a town and detonate each one of them at will after I mow down a whole area of you snotty rich," and it continued with a string of expletives.
Snotty as rich motherfucking high-strung godlike attitude having worthless piece of shit horse.
The page continued, "All I want to do is kill and injure as many of you as I can." One of the pages that had a recipe for a pipe bomb concluded, "Now our only problem is to find the place that will be ground zero." Today, a sheriff spokesman would not discuss any of this.
All of that is part of the ongoing investigation, and they do not want to make any comments about that right now.
But some of the information given to the sheriff made its way to Neil Gardner, a deputy who was assigned to the high school.
Had you been told about that? I mean, did you have any kind of warning about him?
A little bit, yeah. That he might be capable of making some bombs.
The date when this report was filed would match when Brooks said Dylan told him about the website. It also matches the message Brooks said he saw when he looked at the link. Also, the link Dylan gave Brooks and the link Aaron gave the police are different. One was under the handle Reb Doomer, while the other was under the handle Reb Domain. Domain? Overall, this seems to make Brooks' story credible. The only thing I'd say is interesting is that Dylan would essentially also be incriminating himself by giving the link to Brooks. He was complicit in vandalizing the houses mentioned in the missions and in building pipe bombs that Eric bragged about on the site. In the 1998 report, Dylan's name is written right alongside Eric's, although Eric is called the instigator. However, maybe Dylan figured since he and Eric had already been caught for breaking into a van, they, or he at least, had nothing more to lose. Harris's website. Eric Harris was infamous for ranting and raving on the internet about how much rage he had, and for blabbing about rebel missions he went on with Zach Heckler and Dylan. He'd also post lyrics from German electro rock band KMFDM, which ended up plastered all over the media, often erroneously attributed to Eric himself. A lot of Eric's rants are amusingly juvenile, but something about them does tend to veer into "are you okay, man" territory. You know what I hate? When I'm walking around in a mall and there's this slow as shit person walking in front of me. God damn it, I'm trying to get somewhere, so move it or lose it, bitches. You know what I hate? OJ. God, I fucking hate that worthless trial. Who in their right friggin' mind would care about that trial? It's not any different from any other murder trial. Tell those fucking reporters to get a life. And what the fuck do we have to gain by watching that stupid trial anyway? It's not news. It's a trial. Not news. Trial. Trial does not equal news. You know what I love? Making fun of stupid people doing stupid things. Like one time when I was watching this freshman try to get on a computer that needed a password. He typed in the password and waited. The Rusty didn't press enter or anything. He just waited. Then he started cussing at the computer saying it was screwed up. Then the freshman went and got a teacher and the fucking teacher could not figure out why it wasn't going anywhere. Jesus. Personally, I think they should be shot. In some ways, Eric's rants remind me of the ultimate 90s edgelord, Maddox, who penned the best page in the universe. He writes similar aggressive rants from the perspective of someone way smarter than the other morons in the world. For example, his articles, "People who label themselves hopeless romantics are stupid and should be shot," or "Old people should be eaten." Thing is, while Maddox has a clear sense of satire and hyperbole in his rants, Eric's tend to read like the ravings of a kid who just ate 60 hot peppers without water. One of the funniest things in Eric's rants is that he seems to have, consciously or not, thrown a jab at Dylan. He wrote, "You know what I hate? Young smokers. They think they are so goddamn cool with their big bad cigarettes and their so cool attitude. I can't wait until they are about 25 and they have to breathe through their fucking necks and talk with a computer hooked up to their ex vocal cords." Klebold had picked up smoking at 15 and was a regular smoker ever since, always hanging out in the smoker's pit a few feet from the school. And guess who'd be right there with him? Harris. Seems like Eric was doing the classic self-own, except for one thing. Apparently Eric wasn't an actual smoker, more of a poser. He had his favorite brand of cigarettes and was even known to smoke a cigar or two, but unlike Dylan, he took care to inhale shallowly or not at all. And in one of their home movies, Radioactive Clothing, he looks like he barely knows how to use a lighter.
Hey, I don't got a light. You got one? Yeah, hold on a second. You get mine first. Try not to laugh when you light me.
Anyway, I think it's easy enough to say in hindsight that Eric's website was a flaming red flag. It's true that there was a fuck ton of edginess on the interwebs of the 90s, but Eric's seemed to take it to that next level sometimes. This case is full of things that remind you it happened in very different times. Eric's website is one of them. If the things he said had been put on a mainstream platform like Twitter or Facebook, it would be reported and taken down immediately nowadays. But 90s AOL was totally chill with it, and the police were careless enough to lose the file the Browns gave them reporting it, not finding it again until 2003. By the way, here's a skit from Mad that Eric's You Know What I Hate rants were based on. Klebold and Harris's journals. The most enduring look into the killer's minds remains their journals, though in actuality it seems that only Harris had a traditional journal. Klebold's journal is actually notes scattered among his school papers and daily planners, put together chronologically based on their dates. Both journals are pretty fascinating to read. They highlight the fact that while Klebold and Harris were seemingly very different personalities, their differences were fairly superficial when compared to their core similarities. Some say they were a match made in hell. That's a bit hyperbolic, but I can see what they mean. Their personalities were eerily well matched, and it's easy to see why they were good friends. Let's take a brief look at the journals and their similarities and differences. They both play it fast and loose with the English language. Klebold invents his own words in an elegant and almost poetic way, such as sad, desolate, lonely, unsalvageable I feel I am, for example. He also uses slightly odd syntax and sentence structure. For example, that's how I know the everything is true. Harris writes in a very straightforward, easy to understand way, but could not give less of a fuck about whether words are spelled correctly. Quote, by the way, spelling is stupid unless I say spell it how it sounds, it's the fucking easiest way. They both seem to think of themselves as godlike beings above others, though an interesting difference here is that while Eric seems to wish he was God, Dylan seems to believe he is God. Harris, I feel like God and I wish I was, having everyone officially lower than me. Klebold, I understand the everything. I am the God of the everything. They both try to reconcile their godlike selves with their flawed human selves. Klebold seems ashamed of his humanity and tends to regard it as a separate entity, as you can see in this entry where he apologizes to his soulmate for watching pornography and being kinky. I'm forever sorry, infinitely, about the pornos. My humanity has a foot fetish, and bondage extreme liking. I try to thwart it, sometimes to no effect, yet the masturbation has stopped. I'm sorry, redacted. Harris, on the other hand, is unapologetic and straightforward about his hypocrisy. Yeah, I know that I hate liars, and I am one myself, oh fucking well. It's okay if I'm a hypocrite, but no one else, because I am higher than you people, no matter what you say. If you disagree, I would shoot you. They both have a very high sense of superiority, which ties right into the whole godlike thing. Eric affectionately refers to his audience as, you stupid fucks, and you pathetic fools. Dylan writes, I think too much, I understand. I am God compared to some of those unexistible brainless zombies, yet the actions of them interest me, like a kid with a new toy. Klebold's journal is full of intense and obvious self-loathing. Literally every page reeks of it, and despite his claims of godhood and superiority, his self-hatred bleeds through. Some god I am. All people I ever might have loved have abandoned me. My parents piss me off and hate me. Want me to have fucking ambition. How can I when I get screwed and destroyed by everything? I have no money, no happiness, no friends. Eric will be getting farther away soon. I'll have less than nothing. How normal. But Harris also has a deep-rooted self-loathing, something which occasionally gets overlooked because he's careful not to mention it very often. I have always hated how I looked. I make fun of people who look like me, sometimes without even thinking, sometimes just because I want to rip on myself. That's where a lot of my hate grows from. The fact that I have practically no self-esteem, especially concerning girls and looks and such. Therefore, people make fun of me. Constantly. Therefore, I get no respect, and therefore, I get fucking pissed. Klebold and Harris both seem to not care if they live or die, but Harris seems less like he actually wants to die, and more like he would rather just be free to do what he wants, even if it means he has to die in the process. He writes, I have thought too much, realized too much, found out too much, and I'm too self-aware to just stop what I'm thinking and go back to society because what I do and think isn't right or morally accepted. No, 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 God fucking damn it, no. I will sooner die than betray my own thoughts. But before I leave this worthless place, I will kill whoever I deem unfit for anything at all, especially life. And if you pissed me off in the past, you will die if I see you. Klebold, on the other hand, is more actively suicidal in his writings and seems to think the state of death is preferable to life. He crosses out his own name, writes about how depressed and miserable he is, and often makes direct references to killing himself. Quote, Oh God, I hate my life. I want to die really bad right now. When he was 15, he wrote about a dream he'd had that seems to be about his own death. Miles and miles of never-ending grass, like a wheat, a farm, sunshine, a happy feeling in the presence. Absolutely nothing wrong, nothing ever is. Contrary 180 degrees to normal life. No awareness, just pure bliss, unexplainable bliss. The only challenges are no challenge. And then, bam, realization sets in. The world is the greatest punishment. Life. A very important difference is that Eric's journal is clearly written for an audience. He started his journal when the plan to go MBK was already in motion, which is probably why it's written differently from Klebold's. Eric frequently references people, whether it's survivors or investigators or just stupid fucks, whom he already anticipates will read the journal. Klebold's notes, on the other hand, start nearly a year before the plan to go MBK, so it's less likely he was thinking of an audience back in, say, March 1997. Whether he planned for the later entries to be read is anyone's guess, but if he did, he doesn't really give that indication. So his journal reads more honestly, and with far more vulnerability, most likely because he didn't intend for anyone else to see it. There are a few moments in Eric's journal that are more personal or vulnerable, but you have to look carefully to find them. I think it was his intention for his journal to be this badass manifesto that made him look psycho. Which, I mean, if that was his intention, it definitely worked. At least according to the FBI and plenty of others who read it and went away thinking Harris was a psychopath. Structure-wise, Harris's journal is also way more straightforward. He brings a straight-to-the-point, zealous energy that you'll notice is also in his school reports, which you'll see later in the Iceberg. Klebold's journal is naturally less cohesive since it's a collection of notes, but there's an interesting, unraveled sweater quality to it. In the beginning, it's easy to see the connection between the entries. He's philosophical and dreamlike, and while his words are sometimes hard to understand, it still makes some sense. The later it gets, though, the more flighty and strange the narrative becomes, until even the dates go missing. It's like those paintings from the dude on LSD. Harris mentions Klebold a lot more in his journal than Klebold mentions Harris. When he writes about being godlike, Harris mentions how Klebold is godlike too. I have something only me and V have, self-awareness. He also writes about fantasies of violence with Klebold. Imagine that, you fuckers. Picture half of Denver on fire just from me and vodka. Oh man, that would be beautiful. Apparently, this strong attachment and joined at the hilt type connection was a common thing for Eric. In Eric's psychology class, there was a dream analysis session where students could opt to anonymously submit their dreams, but everyone knew which one was Eric's because of all the me and Dylan. Klebold does mention a friend with similar affection in his journals, but it isn't Harris. The name has been redacted, but from context clues, it was most likely Zach Heckler, a guy Dylan met in freshman year of high school. They worked in sound tech at the theater together. As you can see here, Zach, Eric, and Dylan also used to go on the rebel missions together, throwing firecrackers and egging houses of people Eric didn't like. But in mid-1997, Zach started dating he and Dylan's mutual friend, Devin Adams, and since he had a girlfriend now, Zach started spending less time just hanging out with Dylan. Grew up, basically. Dylan was crushed. My best friend ever. The friend who shared, experimented, laughed, took chances with, and appreciated me more than any friend ever did, has been ordained, passed on, in my book. Ever since Redacted, who I wouldn't mind killing, has loved him. That's the only place he's been, with her. If anyone had any idea how sad I am, I mean, we were the team. When him and I first were friends, hell, I'd finally found someone who was like me, who appreciated me, and showed very common interests. Ever since 7th grade, I felt lonely. When Redacted came around, I finally felt happiness, sometimes. We did cigars, drinking, sabotaged the houses, everything for the first time together. And now that he's moved on, I feel so lonely without a friend. Oh well, maybe he'll come around. In their journals and their ideas, Klebold and Harris definitely have a weird synergy. I feel like in every difference there's some kind of similarity, and vice versa. Personally, what I got from the journals is that Harris seems unforgiving about who he is. He feels different than everyone else, but he sees that as a good thing. It's a sign that he is who he's supposed to be. He seems angry that society has beaten the individuality and human instincts, as he calls them, out of other people, and most of his anger towards humanity seems to be over the fact that they've allowed themselves to be molded by a society and have no sense of authentic selves anymore. For this flaw, he hates people with a passion, calls them idiots, and wants them to die. He seems to think that because he is true to himself, this makes him godlike, despite the fact that he has flaws and can be just as hypocritical as anyone else, a fact he admits to. But Harris's journals are also full of contradictions, frustration, and pain. He insists he's godlike, then admits he has no self-esteem. He wishes people would think for themselves, then says individualism is what ruined a government he loved. Remember what I said earlier about the hot potato? Like most people that age, Harris's beliefs seemed to be in a constant state of flux, although there were some things that stayed consistent. Klebold seems more distressed over being different, even though he also considers himself more intelligent and godlike than everyone else. He thinks his inability to connect with the rest of the world is a curse, that his self-awareness makes him inhuman. He hates the jocks and zombies of supposedly lower intellect because he envies their happiness, their ability to live like real humans. Harris's journals read like an augmentation to the character he was already known to have. His anger issues and fairly aggressive nature weren't really a secret to anyone, though the extremes of his philosophy were still a surprise to those who knew him. Klebold's journals read more like a secret side. The more aggressive and negative side of Klebold's character, while not completely hidden, was more suppressed than Harris's. When he was drunk, the negativity, depression, and homicidal anger leaked out into his journal. You'll also notice as the timeline goes on that Klebold's good 100% normal kid armor cracks more and more. Another interesting thing in the journals was seeing the birth and infancy of Klebold and Harris's philosophies. A lot of people wonder why Eric and Dylan didn't just wait a few more weeks, graduate, and move on with their lives. If their gripe was with their high school, they were literally about to leave. Why not just tough it out? I think maybe the answer to that is in the journals. Their philosophies are far from developed or mature, but one thing they both seem to agree on is that society sucks. It's useless, constraining, and ultimately unfair. The system is not one they can win in. I think they saw their school as just one example of this, which is why they targeted the entire school, not just bullies or those they personally hated. But I think they may have figured the rest of their lives would just be more of the same, that they would never be free, and that the shit they loathed so much about high school was the same shit they would have to deal with for the rest of their lives. I think that's why they were so keen to do the massacre before high school ended. After high school, they would have to join society for real. But, to quote Eric, there is no actual real world. I get the feeling Dylan and Eric knew what they were capable of as far as their futures. Eric writes, "I would have been a fucking great Marine. It would have given me a reason to do good." Dylan was accepted at all 3 colleges he enrolled in and waitlisted at a 4th. So I think they had some idea, at least, that they could have had success in the traditional sense. They may have just not wanted it. But I'm a very unqualified individual. Let's hear what the experts had to say. Harris was a psychopath. The FBI was quick to start analyzing the shooter's journals to discover the motives behind the massacre. Harris was determined to be a psychopath, or a budding psychopath, since an individual under 18 can actually be diagnosed with psychopathy. While Harris was 18 when he died, the majority of the journals and behavior which the diagnosis was based on occurred when he was 17 and younger. Harris's supposed lack of empathy, lack of genuine emotion, and alleged ability to manipulate the people around him into doing what he desired, as well as his narcissistic wish to be a god who decided the fates of others, are all traits of the clinical psychopath. Psychopaths also feel an intense desire to remain in control, a trait Eric also had. For example, he liked the idea of smoking and drinking for its rebel cool factor, but wouldn't really inhale and was careful not to get drunk because he disliked feeling out of control. He also disliked the medication he was on for his anger issues for the same reason. He felt society was trying to control his behavior and he hated that. So he started tripping off his meds, going on and off them when he felt like it.
And towards the end, I had been told that he actually stopped taking his medication. And sometimes it was almost frightening to see one minute how he was a very nice, happy, normal guy, and the next minute he was very, very angry, almost sinister at times.
Sexual offending is another sign often associated with psychopathy, and while it doesn't seem like Eric acted on any of his fantasies during his lifetime, in his journal he writes of his desire to pair woman, quote, "Who can I trick into my room first?" Another trait of the psychopath is shallow emotions. One common misconception about psychopaths is that they have no emotions at all, when in actuality, they are typically said to have fleeting emotions that don't run as deeply as non-psychopaths. Their strongest emotional responses are usually anger and pleasure. Both of these emotions feature prominently in Harris's journal. He also writes about having to keep up a mask. "I'm showing too much of myself, my views and thoughts. People might start to wonder. Smart ones will get nosy and something might happen to fuck me over. I might need to put on one hell of a mask here to fool all of you some more." To some, this is a clear sign of psychopathy, as psychopaths have no problem hiding the real them through endless lies and deception if it means getting to use others and reaching their goals. In his journal, Eric writes, "You know what? I feel like telling about lies. I lie a lot, almost constant, and to everybody, just to keep my own ass out of the water. And by the way, side note, I don't think I am doing this for attention, as some people might think. Let's see. What are some big lies I have told? Yeah, I stopped smoking. For doing it, not for getting caught. No, I haven't been making more bombs. No, I wouldn't do that. And of course, countless other ones." And finally, during the massacre, while Dylan Klebold acted more like the kind of psycho you see in the movies, screaming at people and making fun of them before they died, Eric Harris, while also engaging in some taunting and jeering, was overall far more calm, cool, and collected, which is more consistent with an actual psychopath. Not everyone buys the psychopath theory, though. In his journal, Eric writes, "Someone's bound to say, what were they thinking when we go in BK or when we were planning it? So this is what I'm thinking. I have a goal to destroy as much as possible, so I must not be sidetracked by my feelings of sympathy, mercy, or any of that. So I will force myself to believe that everyone is just another monster from Doom, like FH or FS or demons, so it's either me or them. I have to turn off my feelings." Which implies that Harris knew the massacre would be emotionally taxing and could awaken feelings that could hinder him, a fairly typical and non-psychopathic assumption to make. In the basement tapes, he expresses a lot of regret over what the massacre will do to his parents, saying at different points, "I really am sorry about all this, and this is going to tear them apart. They will never forget it." He He even appears to start crying when he's alone, speaking about how he wishes he could go back to Michigan and see old friends one last time. At the end of the tapes, when Harris begins to sound particularly regretful, saying, "Yeah, everyone I love, I'm really sorry about all this. I know my mom and dad would just be like, just fucking shocked beyond belief. I'm sorry, alright? I can't help it." It's 𝕮𝖒𝖏 who interrupts with, "We did what we had to do." Harris was also fond of animals, a stark contrast to the stereotypical psychopath who has a tendency to engage in animal torture. He'd had a dog named Sparky since he was a kid, and the dog was getting old and ill and seizure-ridden. When the dog was close to death, Eric was very worried, and Dylan took a double shift where they worked so Eric could spend more time with his dog. Psychiatrist Peter Langman and the FBI psychiatrist 𝕮𝖒 𝖊𝖊, who originally put forth the theory that Harris was a psychopath, argue that these moments of vulnerability are just more signs that Harris was emotionally manipulative, as psychopaths tend to be, or he was just showing the fleeting emotions typical of a psychopath. But others argue that too much of what's being called traits of psychopathy for Harris are actually fairly normal behaviors for a boy his age, and that dismissing his more vulnerable, emotional moments as psychopathic manipulation is reductive and even harmful. They also point to Eric's childhood, where he built strong friendship bonds with kids his age and seemed to genuinely value them. In a school report, he wrote, "Losing a friend is almost the worst thing to happen to a person, especially in the childhood years. I've lived in many places, but the last 3 places have been the most fun and the greatest experiences of my childhood. Although memories stay with you, the actual friend doesn't. I have lost many great friends, and each and every time I lost one, I went through the worst days of my life. Since losing a friend is something I've experienced many times, I know what Alexandra feels like, and oh pioneers, and it isn't something I would like to feel for a long time." Posthumous diagnoses in general are a dodgy idea, especially when considering a condition as severe as psychopathy, or the mental illness related to psychopathy that Harris could have been labeled with, as psychopathy isn't an actual mental diagnosis, but rather a clinical term. That said, at least 4 clinicians, Peter Langman, 𝕮𝖒 𝖊𝖊, Frank Ochberg, and Mary Ellen O'Toole, considered Harris high on the psychopathy scale. And on the flip side, it's generally accepted in psychiatry that a diagnosis of ASPD and similar disorders can't be issued to a minor under 18, or based on a minor under 18. Because he's dead, Eric's diagnosis is likely never going to be definitive, but if you want to play along with the "Is Eric Harris a psychopath?" debate, find a free online copy of the Hare Psychopathy Checklist, which is typically used in forensic psychiatric analysis, and decide for yourself how much of Eric's behavior fits in line with it from what you already know and what you continue to see as the iceberg goes on.